Yes, hello everyone. I've been lecturer here during the last 4.5 years at Stockholm University and now at the Institute for Child and Youth Studies. And I will talk about what kind of democracy, analyzing the roots of the climate crisis and organizing the way out of it. I will just change here to full screen mode. And I won't talk a lot about the intergenerational aspect. I will mention it, which is my main focus here at university. I will give you a broad overview about my thoughts about democracy and why it's important to understand it, to understand the crisis. So I start with the argument that we should rethink democracy, big words, and that if we don't explore the core of democracy, we have difficulties to understand the causes of the crisis, the way how to organize the transition out of them, and the structure of a global, just sustainable society and its political economics. Yep. So this is a different approach from the ones which focus first on sustainability, political economy, for example, degrowth, or human needs within planetary boundaries, and talk about democracy later on. So the questions are how to analyze the crisis in terms of formal and substantial democracy. I will come back to that. What to aim for politically, and I will talk about 3 pillars and 2 principles of intersectional systemic transformation, respecting intergenerational global justice, and how to contribute to political change. And I will talk about grassroots movements using civil disobedience. You can also ask the same question like, what is the dough of the donut made of? I think almost all of you know this picture of Kate Raworth, and which is a kind of a picture of the crisis we are in with climate.
I don't think your slides are moving forward.
Sorry?
It's still on slide 1 for us in the.
Oh, how can I change that?
I don't know. You seem to have arrows to move forward in the upper right.
No, it was okay. I will try it again. Good that you say that. Sorry for that.
Yeah, try now.
Can you see it now? No, it's written. I stop share and I share it again. This happened before because it's written your share is paused. So I will share it again.
Yes, now there's a new slide for us.
Okay. So the causes of the crisis, organize the transition, and how to contribute to political change. And here is the picture by Kate Raworth with the donut. And you see the crisis we are in, with humanity faces the challenge of how to achieve a high quality of life for over 7 billion people without destabilizing critical planetary processes. And I will just mention in the beginning these aspects because I think we have a kind of shared understanding of it with a great acceleration. It's not only one crisis, but a climate crisis, biodiversity crisis, and so on. And some of the planetary boundaries are broken and not all social needs are met. The emissions go up, no new fossil fuel infrastructure is planned for and built, forests are cut down, and so on. And the temperature rises, it's on the way to 2 or 3 degrees warmer living planet with millions of people who have to leave home, droughts, heat waves, social conflicts, which is a very dark future we are heading for if we don't change drastically and fast. And there is the danger of tipping points. And now there is a progressive mainstream analysis of the causes of the crisis, which says all of these dimensions are interlinked through the way how we organize society, political economy, and our value system, which is producing classes, privileges. And this is called intersectional power analysis, which is kind of mainstream now in social sciences. We have a history of colonialism and patriarchy, and it's built on historical and structural injustice. It's very different who is producing the crisis, the emissions, and who is benefiting from them, and who is suffering. The most affected people in areas, MAPA, are in the center. And you can analyze these with system theory or transformation theory, like Maya Göpel, and look at the mindset, values, attitudes, rules, political economy, education, and so on. And then you can come up with a kind of progressive politics, which a lot of us share, which says we need a new framework that would be great, which focuses on a safe and just space, all human needs, well-being within planetary boundaries, maybe making possible a kind of post-growth or degrowth society, reducing the material and energy throughput. It's a kind of insight that the GDP growth can't be the main compass. And new politics which could live up to this could be a global basic income and services, kind of care economy, a regenerative agriculture and forestry, sustainable product, circular economy, and so on and so on, transformation of financial sector and the economy. And tools could be a CO2 budget and regulations, global fossil fuel, non-proliferation treaty, and we could do that with mass movements. Now, my point is, to justify this approach and to get it into place, we should much more think about the concept of democracy, and especially about what I call the relation between formal and substantial democracy, and especially about what substantial democracy could be. So our relation to nature and how anthropology and social psychology is linked to political economics. So I will talk about this in the rest of my talk. And if we would talk in these terms and discuss these problems, I think the dynamics of the power relations would be more visible and we could change it better. That's my hope, so to say. So there is a possibility of, I have to see, no. Just 1 second. Here we have a definition of formal democracy and substantial democracy. Formal democracy, you can say it's a view on individuals, nations, and institutions, which is important. Obviously, everyone has formally the same vote, it's focused on collective decision-making processes like elections. It's using a liberal form of inclusiveness, like saying everyone is allowed to take part in processes. It's focusing on human rights and individual needs. It's defined by, since Locke and Jefferson, freedom as license to own, as license to dominate. And it's reflected in the UN Charter, Article 1 and 2, with a security approach focusing on the territorial aspects. So I would like to say there is another kind of defining democracy, which I call the substantial democracy, as a quality of relations and relational structures. And so I would like to define it as a meeting as equals. And I think if we use the word democracy in everyday life, we often mean this kind of definition of democracy. Like meeting as equals on the same eye level, not accepting relations and structures of dominance. Everyone should have more or less the same power and influence. We should have non-instrumental relations, caring for others' existence, focusing on intersectional dimensions of oppressions, structures which reproduce privileges, and so on. And very important here, the intergenerational justice aspects, the well-being of the youth comes first. And just to summarize this aspect of substantial democracy, we could say it's a caring for the common livelihood, a living planet, not breaking the planetary boundaries, creating a safe space. If someone destroys like the common or future foundation of the social or natural space, we would say this person doesn't act in a democratic spirit. I think that's kind of obvious if we think about families or school classes or whichever dimension of democracy. If somebody destroys like the foundation of the livelihood for the other ones, we would say, no, wait a second, this is not okay. There is a possibility of a conflict or breakdown of democracy if this is tipping on one side or the other side. So I just listed some of them. It's like corporations in individual states can, in the name of elections, human rights, and etc., own and cut down forests which are relevant for biodiversity. Population can vote for regime or governments which neglect substantial democracy, which are authoritarian, which don't stop the emissions, which reproduce oppression. Constitutional processes are kind of formal answer to that. States can define contracts which allow fossil fuel extraction, which will have devastating effects on the most affected people and areas and the global community. And the UN Charter is kind of lacking a Article 0, which is kind of defining us as one people living on one planet. And all these things happen in the name of formal democracy, using media, existing power relations, and so on. So there are tools to integrate the substantial into the formal democracy, like constitutions or teaching intersectional analysis or intergenerational justice in institutions like mine, or the respect for civil disobedience. That's why it's so dangerous if states like Switzerland or the UK suddenly change the laws so that civil disobedience is almost seen as a kind of terrorism. And so in that sense, formal democracy can take up aspects of the substantial ones, women's rights, workers' rights. But there is a strong critique or another view on it, a post-socialist critique on modern societies in sociology, which says there is an illusion of independence of the societal sectors like jurisdiction, economy, parliaments, media, private life, all are more or less the same expression and reproduction of a form of democracy which legitimizes existing power relations and class inequalities. For example, through the definition of freedom as ownership, as license to dominate. So there are inbuilt informal democracy problems, so to say. So my take is, how can we solve this? Not only by elections or not only by kind of writing articles about new policies, because we have somehow to lift up the substantial democracy in other ways. So my take is a double take on how to rethink democracy. It's two aspects which we should understand better, I think. It's domination as such and the opposite of domination, meeting as equals, or being connected, or being humane. I think there are quite a few texts which are reflecting or exploring the phenomenon of dominating as such, and the opposite of it, real meetings, strengthening meetings as equals. There are a lot of texts about some specific ways of domination, which are extremely important, obviously. And there is the whole intersectional analysis with gender, ethnicity, class aspects, how some groups dominate other groups in society. But I would say it's easy that it becomes a kind of academic discussions about which the dimension of oppression is more important and so on. And there is a kind of forgotten roots of this intersectional thinking in critical theory, Black feminism, queer feminist theory, like Angela Davis, which says it's not only about discrimination in one field and how it affects others, it's about the basic phenomenon of domination in itself, of pushing down, holding down people, groups, or having space. And that would be, so to say, the opposite, having space and resources to breathe and live, and knowing that the other ones will treat you with dignity and see you as equals. So it's not only about formal rights and justice, but about the substantial democratic relations, so to say. So my argument, it's necessary to look at this phenomenon of domination in itself and to train to get rid of it. And you can't do that only by reading textbooks. It's a kind of bodily, socially practice, even within universities. So it's not just about exploitation or expansion or digging mines or oppressing workers or cutting down forests, slaughtering animals, which are horrible, but it's about the phenomenon, understanding the phenomenon in itself. And this is important because of the reverse argument. If all these aspects are ways of oppressing, then you can see other ways, so to say, which are now kind of legitimized in our formal democracies, but which we should call out. For example, if rich people just being rich can become richer and holding down poor people, this is a problem of oppression, so to say, which is legitimized by formal democracy, but which we should call out, at least in some theories. So that is why I say in analogy to the Paris Agreement, to define ourselves as democratic is in itself a much stronger compass than thought, because it's kind of going against all aspects of oppression. And for me, in university, it's important to say it's not just about empathy or compassion, which are so central, obviously, but it's about making domination visible and to play with it in safe spaces. So it's not just about oppressing all impulses to dominate, but to see it and to integrate it. We shouldn't just watch away and pretend that we all are empathic or compassionate. I think it's much more about how we see this phenomenon and make it visible. And it's also about daily training, which we do here and which we did in a BA program, which I led. It's a kind of bodily social training, mirroring each other's ways of dominating. And that can be on the micro level or on a macro level. And now the other point is, what's the opposite of the logic of domination? And logic means influencing attitudes, values, structures, politics. And I would say it's logic of strengthening meetings as equals beyond dominance. You can also say it's love, like Eva von Redeker, my colleague in Berlin, says. And it's a kind of creating connectedness and making interdependence visible, caring or repairing something which I call a material of integrity or holistic thinking. And this material of integrity is hurt or damaged if we just let people die because they have nothing to eat, or if we obviously use violence and so on. And you can say, you can have a look towards nature, understanding the complexity, for example, of forests, permaculture, regenerative agriculture, and towards humans. And here I would like to highlight the idea of not forcing into tension and creating contact or connectedness instead towards oneself, others, and the environment. And this is barely taught in schools or universities. For example, adult-child relations. Donald Winnicott wrote a lot about that, and Daniel Stern. And this goes beyond scientific method of socio-economical system theory, because it's about phenomenology, you could say, about understanding of a lived experience and practice, integrating, for example, indigenous knowledge. So I would like to be more precise, highlight 5 spaces which are interdependent, which are kind of making this connectedness or contact possible or impossible. I just want to mention them. There is the neuropsychological space. Helen Mary Imodino Young did a lot of interesting research about empathy there and compassion. There is the physiological space. And I would like to highlight again the thought that we should focus on creating spaces which allow not to be tensed. I believe that this is such a huge problem in our societies. And this is another framing than the neoliberal framing about stress and mindfulness. And I would like to mention the Alexander technique as a way of understanding it. I think a lot of people, me included, have a lot of tensions and don't even understand them, and are pushed into being tensed by the society, by the lack of substantial democracy. And this is also an aspect of the intersubjective space, which I call synesthetic attunement. It's about how we can create meetings, very specific meetings, like Daniel Stern wrote about that, where we don't have to tense up, where we meet really, where we can get into contact. And freedom in this sense of a substantial democracy can be defined as creating together spaces of integrity. And on a social level, that's the fourth space, the question becomes how to organize spaces in classrooms, universities, movements, healthcare, in which 1, 2, and 3 becomes possible, in which we don't have to tense up, in which we can really meet, and so on. And my approach is always to say in my workshops as the first thing, everyone cares for everyone else. And that is something different from saying everyone is allowed to take part. And I believe that if you don't establish this kind of explicit rule, you will not get a kind of substantial democratic relations. You will sustain domination. And that's what I call the difference between liberal and social inclusiveness. Because if you just say everyone is allowed to take part, it's the same 2, 3 people who are speaking up, which have the biggest social capital, and so on. So I think that's a kind of mind shift from a formal to a substantial democratic way of interacting. Everyone cares for everyone else. And then on a political level, you can think about how to create political and economic structures which allow these other 4 spaces. And as I said, creating or destroying a material of integrity so that no one is left behind. Now, I would like to say, come to the final part soon, which are the consequences for us for movement building in university and so on. But I just want to mention that I believe that this kind of a substantial democracy can't be reformulated in terms of needs and well-being. I wrote quite a lot about that. And that's why I would say we have to go beyond this approach of Reverth and Goepel and so on. I think this longing for connectedness and non-alienated relations, substantial democratic relations, is not formidable in terms of needs. The attachment theory, for example, is kind of showing that children can give up this contact because of the need for nearness and security, and so on. And it's not showing up because it's a relational quality. It's not showing up in these traditional theories about needs and well-being. So now I just want to draw some consequences out of these ideas. One is about the integration of substantial and formal democracy by changing the formal one. So I think we really need a new Article 0 in the UN Charter about that we are one people on one living planet, and that you can't just start with a security thinking. We need a safety thinking, and the territorial integrity is not enough, so to say, because it allows nations to cut down forests or to produce emissions which are damaging the livelihoods of everyone, and so on. So I don't go through all levels, but I believe that we have to redefine human rights as well, because there is kind of a definition of ownership which is problematic, and we have to redefine the parliamentary work, integrating youth science in a different way and making citizen assemblies possible, and so on. And my thought is that it's not enough to formalize substantial aspects of democracy, which is done all the time, and which is extremely important by changing the constitutional law or for example, to fight for the ecocide law or new policies. I mean, obviously we have to do that as well, but I don't believe that we can just say, okay, we just go on by these process. So this has also consequences for the formulation of demands or goals for our movements. I wrote a text about it, and because I would say, instead of just writing a list of demands, we have to make clear that we put this substantial democracy in the center. And so I have 3 or 4 pillars: treat the crisis like a crisis with the CO2 budgets, fossil fuel treaty to keep the fossil fuels in the ground, to keep the forests intact. But I have also here a demand of that we should together provide enough resources for everyone. And that's the most core aspect of substantial democracy. So it's not enough just to stop like the problems with the emissions and fossil fuel burning. We have at the same time guaranteed, so to say, a substantial democratic framework. And that's why I say always we should focus on 2 principles, not just one. The first is socially intersectional and intergenerational justice, but this is often framed just as heighten the taxes and so on, and expanding rights, for example, by Piketty. But the problem is this is not enough. This is kind of keeping up the existing structures of domination. That's why I always say we need the second principle of getting rid of structures of domination by doing this just transition to non-emission sustainable society, so to say. That's also something which I think these 3 pillars or 4 pillars and 2 principles could global grassroots movement like People for Future fight for. I can talk about that later. And a third consequence is on the intergenerational climate justice movement building, because I would highlight the substantial democratic aspects again. So that's why I focus on grassroots. I think the grassroots movements are completely needed if we want to get our policies of substantial democracy into the formal democratic world, so to say. There is a lot of research done in this realm, which shows that if you just put forward policies, progressive policies, nothing will change, so to say. You need really grassroots movement which use civil disobedience to change systemic aspects. That's how the women's rights and the workers' rights and so on were pushed through. So you have to use substantial democratic methods to get the substantial democratic aspects into the formal democracy. And but it has also consequences for the way how we build our grassroots movements. So I try to say always that we need a kind of socially inclusive way. And I'm very skeptical if people just say in a kind of formal democratic way, everybody can just do what everybody wants to do, because then the powerful ones and the ones who have the biggest social and economic capital will just do their stuff and take all the resources. So that's why I think it's so important to create these platforms where everyone tries to listen to everyone, and especially tries to listen to the young ones. So the well-being of the young ones comes first. So it's not just possible to say, okay, but this is a form of democracy, everybody can do what everyone wants to do. That's kind of a wrong approach. If you believe in these thoughts that we should integrate the substantial democratic thinking into all aspects here of the transformation and transition. And then at last point, consequence for education, science, and universities. So schools and pedagogy, didactics should focus on making substantial democratic meetings possible in the school space, and for the university, this is especially important, I think. So I would say we need a new center at every university, because it's kind of absurd that you can become a teacher or economist or lawyer without even understanding the causes of the crisis, or the crisis, the climate crisis. And we should create these centers so that we can provide the knowledge about these democratic and formal aspects of democracy, and the knowledge how to create a sustainable world. And this must happen now. We can't just wait in 10 years. So I think it would be great to have a prototype of such a center, providing the important knowledge about the crisis and influencing all institutes, or at least to make this possible, that the other institutes like agriculture or architecture or history just ask, hello, we would like to understand the climate crisis and the causes. And to do so, we have to always link social and natural sciences. We have to link thoughts about global justice and intersectional justice with thoughts about the causes for the climate crisis and the understanding of the emissions and so on. So this will influence all curricula, but it will also influence the teaching methods, the didactics, because like the substantial democracy becomes relevant there, the care and the social inclusiveness, and to being aware and using the dimension that we are bodily embodied beings in social relations. And it will also has consequences for the research ethics, because we begin with the substantial democratic point of view, and we see the suffering first and react to that. And to close my thoughts, I would like to say, within universities, now most scientists or uni teachers are kind of activists for the status quo, neglecting substantial democracy, which strengthens their privilege and holds down people, because there are such a lot of structures of dominance reproduced within the university system. I mean, there is one report after the other ones every year about the class aspect, about who is studying, that is completely dependent on your parents and the class of your parents. It's reflected in the teaching methods, kind of done in a way which is, again, strengthening class differences, and so on. I talked about that in a lecture at Karolinska Institute. And if you just don't speak up, you just strengthen that kind of structures of dominance. And I think this is completely linked to the problem that most people just don't take in the climate crisis, because it's another aspect of just going on with structures of dominations which are there. So I would like to say, join grassroots movements like Scientists for Future or People for Future, and change the universities. So I'm skeptical against this narrative of us as the good ones who are teaching the rest of the world how it should be, so to say. We should start with ourselves, very much questioning what is going on in our spaces. And this has obviously now consequences on the design of the politics and policies, so we can rethink post-degrowth or basic human income now with the compass of substantial democracy, and not only for empirical reasons, like if a decoupling is possible between a growth, for example, and emissions or material throughput. But we have a much stronger compass, which is that we should get rid of structures of domination and provide substantial democracy. Thank you.